Welcome to Inside Government, highlighting the Department of Labor Affairs and Social Services. The Department of Labor Affairs is a government executing agency that falls under the Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labor for Country St. Martin. The department is charged with the responsibility of all matters pertaining to labor, such as registration, dismissals, complaints, vacancies, and employment permits, to name a few. The department is working tirelessly to improve the products and services offered to both the business as well as the job-seeking employed clientele. New efforts and initiatives such as job coaching, the customer feedback system, and the Memorandum of Understanding (MOU) partnerships with local businesses to foster training and employment opportunities are currently being implemented within the department. The Department of Social Services is also a government executing agency that falls under the Ministry of Public Health, Social Development and Labor for Country St. Martin. This department is charged with providing quality social aid services to the general public, both in material as in immaterial aid. The department prides itself on treating each member of the community as if he or she was a member of the family by providing the best service in the areas of health insurance, social security, social work, and guidance and care. Social services officers pride themselves on expanding beyond the job description to provide services such as budget counseling, life coaching sessions, and the Feed Our Families initiative, to name a few. In an interview conducted with Head of the Department of Labor Affairs and Social Services, Mrs. Peggy Ann Dros-Richardson, she spoke about the structure and responsibilities of her departments, marketing initiatives, improvements and plans for 2015 and beyond.
The Department of Labor Affairs has as its core responsibility employment permits, and those are permits, as we know, for persons that seek employment in St. Martin that are non-nationals, so therefore persons that are not the holders of Dutch passports. The department also deals with labor registrations, or what the community knows as business registrations. We also deal with vacancy registrations, registering of those persons seeking employment. We deal with dismissal applications, so that's for companies that request dismissal of individuals or mass dismissals. We also deal with conflict resolution, so if an employee has an issue with how they're being paid, if they're not being paid, if there's breaches in the labor laws and how those are being applied, that's also dealt with by the department. As it regards social services, we also deal there with financial aid, with medical aid, legal aid. We have also social workers. We have 3 of those that deal with what we refer to as the immaterial aid, which is counseling, behavior modification plans, etc. The Department, Social Services, is also very closely linked to third-party caregivers, which also includes Mental Health Foundation, the Turning Point, and other caregivers. The department is also charged with the crisis care unit. So for instance, when we have the burning of the City 40, I think it was referred to as City 40, and we have homes that burn down. We just had a passing of Hurricane Gonzalo, etc. That department is also dealing with that from a crisis management point of view in terms of how we meet the needs of people that are impacted by that sort of crisis.
Dros-Richardson was asked about some common misperceptions the public have of the Department of Labor Affairs and Social Services.
I think the overriding misperception in social services is that people have the impression that if they are in need of financial aid or medical aid or legal aid, that they can just walk in and it'll just happen. We are bound by the law. Both departments are there. The tasks are embedded in an ordinance. And we do have legal timeframes, and we have legal stipulations that have to be fulfilled in order to see if a person can come into consideration for medical aid, financial aid, or legal aid. So that's a big misconception, that people feel that, well, I have the Dutch passport, I'll just go to that department and I must get the aid. It actually, unfortunately, because I sense the frustration from people sometimes, but that does not work like that. There are legislative requirements that we must fulfill in order to see if persons can get aid. From the Department of Labor Affairs is really, in fact, a department that has a lot of stress with pulling. There's a tug from the private sector in terms of businesses that wants our services for employment permits and business registration, and there's a significant tug as it regards persons that want our assistance with employment and with getting their issues resolved. That department has a huge misconception too, because people, the business sector wants it and they want it now. The private sector mentality. And we're also obliged to follow the legal framework as it regards issuing of employment permits under the national ordinance. And we're also bound with dismissal requests to a certain policy and procedure in the manner in which we execute those services. As it regards job placement, we also have misconceptions regarding that. Persons that are unemployed get also a bit frustrated. They want to come to the department, and sometimes we feel that there's an assumption that there's a box of vacancies or a box of jobs available, and you walk in and here's a job, go and report to this XYZ business in Colby starting tomorrow. And unfortunately, and I say that not lightly, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So that's also a misconception.
An account of the labor market was addressed along with accompanied statistical information on what St. Martin's labor market actually looks like.
Persons that pulling financial aid, for the most part, 60% of those persons are persons that belong to the labor market. So persons that are between the ages of 18 to the ages of 45. So for all intents and purposes, unless there's a disability of some sort, able to work. Yeah? Financial aid recipients is about 600 persons per month, to the tune of about 350,000 guilders a month that government pays out in financial aid. It's close to 4 million a year. The medical aid, we have about 1,300 recipients of what we refer to as the pay card. I actually don't like that phrase, because pay card refers to poor people card, and I really don't like that phrase, but people are familiar with it. But medical aid recipients. The crisis aid, we paid about 45,000 guilders in crisis aid last year, 2014. Employment permits, there were about 2,265 permits that were applied for, of which 1,900 of those were granted and about 353 were denied. The total registering of vacancies at the department, so these are businesses that come in and say, I have a vacancy, was 3,200 in the year 2014. However, 90% of those were tied to the prerequisite for employment permit. Okay, very, very important stat to remember. Total unemployed persons registered at the department was 215, of which 70% of those only had secondary school education. Again, an important stat to remember. The portfolio size for a job placement officer, of which we have 3, is approximately 50 to 60 unemployed persons, because you have to remember the database is a revolving one. Although we had 215 persons registered last year as unemployed, we have every year persons that roll over. It's much like the AT&T, it rolls over every year. If you registered in November of 2014 but you didn't gain employment in that year, you roll over to 2015. Yeah. We have total referrals, and referrals is the total amount of times that those persons were referred to jobs was about 415 referrals, and that includes multiple referrals for the one person. So job placement officers kept referring persons to jobs. Of the 415 referrals, approximately 50 of those persons gained employment. Now, Let me stop here a bit, Marsha, because you can understand that when you read these stats and you see that, you say, well, that's a low amount of people that got employed. It's actually a high amount. The department job placement did a fantastic job in that regard, because over the past 3 years, from a single digit, we now have a double-digit successful performance in getting persons sustainable employment. But that's always hampered by the fact that the vacancies that we get are not, in fact, what we refer to as true vacancies, because 90% of those vacancies are tied to employment permits. Yeah, very important aspect. Dismissal requests was about 44 cases. Total complaints, and so that's people coming in to complain about, I didn't get pay right, I'm not getting my vacation, I didn't get my pay slip, was about 388. And again, employment permits, there's a success rate there now of us being able to execute employment permits, and all the legislative time frames tied to that well within the 6 weeks turnaround time.
According to Dros-Richardson, there is a mismatch in terms of the requirements in the labor market and what is actually being offered. This has caused the labor market to be tainted.
The labor market, as we perceive it, has been a bit tainted. Yeah, and I use that word carefully, because we need to be careful what we're saying here. But it has been tainted because we have what we consider to be a mismatch. So there are vacancies that are coming in, and I'm using just example positions. I'm not going to refer to any particular company at all. But I'm just going to say in general, we have a vacancy that comes in for a gemologist. Yeah? And then we have registered persons at the department that only have secondary school education, coming, for instance, from the Academy, Sundial School, GED, St. Dominic, and CIA, Learning Unlimited, our secondary schools, MPC, that actually don't have a gemologist degree. But we have a private company coming in to apply for a gemologist, requesting only secondary school education for that person, but requesting that the person have skills in the task having to do with a gemologist. So I don't know if that answers the question in terms of the labor market. Our people, and when I say our people, I always get, what do you mean by our people? Well, by our people, I mean, first of all, the Dutch national. And then when I say our people, I mean Dutch nationals that are residing in St. Martin, because I have to remember the legislative framework when I say our people, are placed at a disadvantage because there's a mismatch in terms of the requirement in the labor market and what we are able to offer them, for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part.
There are several different opinions about the government's counterpart policy. The department head sought to bring some clarity to the policy situation as it stands.
The counterpart, first of all, was an article that's in the law. It is an article in the law. It's Article 10 of the legislation that has been dormant, as it were. And I say dormant because it has not been applied before in the law for years already. Yeah? Over the past 2 years, we've had one case in particular, and I won't call the name of the company, but this is in fact truth. This company applied for a position within the hospitality industry. The employment permit was initially denied. The company, which is their right, took the Ministry of Labor to appeal. It went to appeal. The appeal committee advised that we should go ahead and grant the employment permit, but to assign to the non-national a counterpart in conformity with Article 10. The company accepted the employment permit. The non-national had the employment permit for 1 year. Everything was happy. Everybody was happy. The company was happy. Upon renewal, so a year later, upon renewal of the employment permit, the department then started to question in terms of, did you get a counterpart to work alongside this non-national in this position, etc. We denied the employment permit upon renewal because the company was not able to provide us with counterpart information. The company took us to court, and the court, the judge, and I want to underline, rightfully so, we lost the case. And the judge clearly stated the reason why we lost the case is because although the article exists, there is no policy framework, if we may, to execute or to define how this article would be executed, therefore placing the private sector or this company at somewhat of a disadvantage. Yeah, and the department also, for lack of a better word, and this is where the accountability comes in, the department also dropped the ball because there are certain parts of that article that puts responsibility on the Department of Labor Affairs that we also did not execute. Bring it front and center now to where we're at. Much talk even on the floor of Parliament concerning the counterpart policy. And as I've stated before, this is now my personal opinion. I would prefer that the counterpart policy is not politicized because we simply believe it would be for the best interests of all involved, all stakeholders, if all are given the opportunity to work and to flesh out this framework. Now, you asked the question concerning, is there a policy in place? The department right now is working on the framework in terms of how the counterpart will be executed. The document is about 50 pages long. We have draft 2 was already sent to the Honorable Minister a few days ago. It is the intention, and we have just completed what we considered or what we are stating to be the communication protocol and a stakeholders analysis, and that basically also was a recommendation of the section head of labor market, Ms. Natasha Richardson, stated, you know, boss, I think we need to do a stakeholder analysis to see how do we move forward with the communication. There's been a lot of talk in the media as well in terms of, you know, are they just going to ram it down the throats of the private sector? And I cannot stress this enough. It is not going to be rammed down the throat of the private sector. We have done an analysis in terms of who this will be communicated to, and it will now rest with the minister in charge to determine when we will roll it out in terms of the communication and the buy-in. I want to also underline, Marcia, which I have stated in the departments, and it is no secret, the counterpart, like anything having to do with employment of those on the local labor market, will not work if we do not have the cooperation of the private sector. It is as simple as that. There needs to be, above and beyond political will, there needs to be the will of the private sector to meet us halfway. And I want to underscore this point as well, Marcia, that in my dealings with the private sector, and this is why I don't want it to become a political pawn, in my dealings with the private sector, for the most part, the private sector has cooperated well with the Department of Labor Affairs. It is because of their good cooperation that the job placement sector in the Department of Labor Affairs has seen a double-digit increase in sustainable employment for persons on the local labor market. I want to underscore that because it makes no sense to get combative and to wage war with private sector. It is not our intention to do that. We need them in order to make this happen, and we believe that we will get their cooperation once we're able to find mutual grounds on agreement in terms of how this counterpart will be rolled out. I hope that answers your question adequately.
Explicitly, what are the benefits of the law?
The benefits is the following, and I think the benefits goes across multiple ministries, yeah, and the benefits are also tied, and this is where it gets for lack of a better word, very interesting. One of the articles in that very same law, and I don't have it in front of me, so it's either Article 7 or Article 11, which has also not been enforced, but is in fact a law. And when I say not enforced, I'm not talking about now. Decades it has not been enforced. That an employment permit will only be extended to a non-national not exceeding 3 consecutive years. Yeah? That has not been applied. Now, Marcia, if you understand the context in which we operate, I'm going to shoot out some more stats at this point. Let me back it up a bit. 60% of the persons pulling financial aid are persons that have been naturalized Dutch, so therefore not born within the Dutch kingdom. Not born in Curaçao, not born in Aruba, not born in St. Martin, not born in Sabre, not Statia, not Holland. They are naturalized, legally so, from other countries. But they are the majority that are pulling financial aid. Now you may be asking me, well, what does that have to do with employment permit? It has a lot to do with employment permit because the employment permit trajectory is a path towards, in fact, naturalization. This is my conclusion, and it is in fact true, because in order to get a residence permit, one of the means to get a residence permit is to get that residence permit through you having an approved employment permit. Yeah? Now, Marsha, I'm not trying to take, you know, like how we say in French Quarter, I ain't trying to take the bread out of nobody's mouth. Every single human being has a right to work, a right to income, a right to well-being. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about how all of these are interconnected, and your question in terms of what is the benefit to the counterpart. The benefit to the counterpart is that we need to be able to shift the paradigm. The paradigm right now is completely to the left. We need to be able to shift it back to the center, where we're saying that are we interested as a country to bring our nationals back from wherever they are to build country? Or are we interested to continue to have this country built by non-nationals who will, through legal means and ways, become naturalized within 5 years, 10 years, whatever the rule at the Ministry of Justice is at this? That's the fundamental question. And then the second question to that is, are we looking at our total investment? And then I'm talking about ROI, return on investment, in terms of how much we pump in educating our local labor market, sending them abroad, but not establishing sufficient means to bring them back.
In closing, Mrs. Dros-Richardson indicated that improvements within her departments have been made.
I've started at the Labor Department in 2011, November 2011. So I'm actually in my third year now. And started at Social Services in December of 2012. I told my staff in the beginning of this year that the past 2.5 years, I think we've laid the foundation in terms of ensuring that we have systems in place. 2015 is going to be the year of accountability across the board. Accountability for how we render services, and placing accountability as well on every single person that comes in requesting our assistance, because I do believe that there needs to be accountability with clients as well. Yeah. One of the major things that we've done in the interim is we've introduced CRM, which is a customer relationship management software introduced by us by Computech, and I have to give my credit and kudos to that company for introducing us to that through our internal ICT department. That software is enabling us to focus primarily on clients. So our services will become client-centered. Let me just explain it in a nutshell. One client comes in, that client's name is, I'll just use you as an example, Marsha. Marsha comes into those departments, we do the intake, we have her information. We need to do a needs assessment. We need to understand what Marsha needs. Does Marsha need financial aid? Does she need medical coverage for her and her dependents? Does she need legal aid to resolve an issue that she has with her employer? Does she need employment? If she's not ready for the labor market, do we need to put her with a social worker? If that social worker can't help her, do we need to refer her to Mental Health Foundation? Is there another issue going on there? Is she addicted? Do we need to refer her to Turning Point? Do we need to put a behavior modification plan in place? Do we need to put her in an adult training program that we're establishing and have established through the Job Coach in 2014? And then we tied that all together. Our 2014 was the year that we coined the phrase putting people first, and 2015 we've coined the phrase because it matters. Because we need to be able to answer the question between those two departments, why are we doing what we are doing for the individual clients? And we're doing it because it matters. Not only because it matters for the client, but because by touching each client, we are in effect touching and effectuating change throughout St. Martin by making those steps available for the individual client. A significant step in that regard. We're also launching our website. The website is going to introduce a capability that we're very excited about. We're going to be tweaking it, but it's going to give persons worldwide, and when I say worldwide, you know, it's the World Wide Web, but I'm particularly excited about the fact that we're going to be able to have a technological, innovative solution to reach students that are studying abroad, that are holders of that Dutch passport, geboren St. Martin. You know, now I'm getting a bit patriotic. However, the website is going to be able to have students log in. They're going to be able to see all the vacancies that are available in St. Martin, and they're going to be able to upload their resumes and diplomas and contact the business directly in order to apply for the job. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about accountability. Because we also, and I'll tie it in nicely now to the employment permit aspect, we also have to hold businesses accountable, and this is in our legislation, that they have exerted sufficient effort to source persons that are nationals, meaning holders of the Dutch passport. And this is our way of also assisting the private sector in their bid to exert that effort. Because I don't believe in putting accountability if I haven't made the tools and resources available to help you in your accountable behavior. I think that's a very important aspect. We also have a Facebook page which we have about 528 likes right now. I want to also add concerning adult training, which is going to be a significant push and which also speaks a lot in terms of accountability. It's very, very important in closing that people understand that they understand that I, as department head, understand this, and my staff comprehends this as well. I've preached this across the floor of those both departments, that persons that arrive at the Department of Social Services and Labor Affairs are persons that are, for the most part, at the bottom of the barrel already. They're struggling. We need to treat them with kid gloves. They need to be cared for. We need to see how we can get them that help as soon as possible. And I'm proud to say that between those two departments, they recognize it. Marcia, listen, 3 years ago, and anybody can attest to this. If someone came in for funeral assistance, it usually took 3 weeks. We have a 48-hour turnaround time right now. Yeah. If someone came in for a medical card, it used to take 2 to 3 months. We have a week turnaround, sometimes 3 days, and the person has the medical card in their hand. Financial aid, people used to come in one and then 3, 4, 5, 6 months they didn't used to hear from the department. We have a turnaround time that if you come in at the beginning of the month, by next month you're on that bank list collecting that financial aid. And so the successes are across the board. And as I state consistently, I state this: any credit, and I say this intently and deliberately, any credit of success between those two departments is absolutely not for my credit. It is for the credit of those two combined teams, because it could not happen without their commitment, without their dedication. And to that, I'd like to add that nothing occurs in those departments if it was not tied to purpose, because I believe, in fact, in living in a purpose-driven life, and everything that we do must have purpose. As the saying goes, you are blessed, and we are blessed as a country, not to be a blessing unto ourselves, but to bless others.